And one of the things that take you out of that awareness is, number one, all the things that happened in the past. All your life history and all the things that you're thinking about, everything that you carry with you all the time. In 1994, I saw this thing and I can never forget it. And so you lose sleep over it at night. This one time I got fired, or this one person, and you take out the photo albums. This is my first marriage. This is my wife, and then this is my second one. She was a terrible person. This is the third one. And you have all these things, the story, this heaviness that you carry with you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us in the Quran that one of the parts of being a Muslim, having Iman, is whatever happened in the past, you attribute it to the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't dwell on it. And if you must dwell on it, you dwell on it to take lessons from it, but not to wallow over it. The Prophet ﷺ said the words only if is one of the doors of shaitan. Somebody's driving, they get into an accident, and then they say, if only I had left 10 minutes later, if only I had done this, if only we had taken him to the doctor sooner, if only we had done. The Prophet ﷺ said, this type of dwelling is from the doors of shaitan. You've opened the door for shaitan, and he said, Wallah, come in. You can have all the access to my brain as you want. And shaitan is doing his waswasa, if only, if only, if only. And you live your life in regret. The Prophet ﷺ said, whatever happened, if something hit you, it was never going to miss you. And if it missed you, it was never going to hit you. Part of ihsan is to recognize that and to leave what happened in the past. And to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this moment. One of our scholars has said, everything that happened in the past, if you really think about it, the only way it can relive, it can be re-experienced, is if you bring it to the attention now. But now, this moment is the only reality that Allah has given you at this moment. If you think about your problems, you have all these problems. Where is that problem? Right now. As you're sitting in the Jummah khutbah and you're thinking about the realities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the experience of life and death, you're hearing all these things. Where is all these problems? It's somewhere in the back of our mind. Just for a moment, imagine they don't exist. Just for a moment, one of the scholars said, imagine you don't have a name. Imagine you don't have a name, you don't have an ego. For a moment, what do you experience? And so they said, if you look at the sky and you look at the world and you see it as if it's something new every single time, you're able to appreciate and be in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. That's what it means to be present. Sulaiman alayhi salam on his horse, he's marching with his soldiers, he's got a war to fight, he's got all this battle to take, he's planning all these military things, he's so present and he's so aware. An ant is walking on the ground and the ant is speaking to its people, and Sulaiman alayhi salam so attuned, he can hear the ant and he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can hear the ant and he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ayub alayhi salam, he's shivering with ailments and pain, and his skin is covered, and he's in a dire situation. And in that pain, he's not lost. He's still thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh Allah, some pain has touched me. And you are the most merciful. He's dwelling on the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, one moment you spend in reflection, one moment you spent in contemplation is actually far greater than 70 years you spent in worship. Why? Because the moment you enter into a state of presence, you enter into the state of ihsan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of you, and you're aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything you look at reminds you of Allah. Like for example, you leave your home, and subhanallah, Allah has caused a tree to grow in front of your house. And this tree, every season, it gives flowers. Have you ever stopped for a moment and just looked at that flower and said, Allah, look at that? Right? That experience of just noticing the sign, the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, this one glance, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, an-nadharu ibadah. The nadhar, the glance, can be an act of worship. He said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, an-nadhar ila al-Kaaba ibadah. When you just glance at the Kaaba, it's an act of worship. He said, an-nadhar ila al-bahri ibadah. When you just glance at the ocean, it's an act of worship. Why? Because you enter into a state of presence. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a man was sitting outside his house in one night and he looked up at the stars and he saw a shu'ara, Sirius B. And he pointed at it. He said, أَشْهَدُ أَنَّ لَكَ رَبًّا قَدْ خَلَقَكَ. I swear by Allah, you have a Lord who created you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that moment forgave all of his sins of the past and the future. One moment of being present and recognizing the maqam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we're either thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future. Right?